Good evening. Hello. AM 1090 listeners in the house. Welcome to the 7th annual AM 1090 Forum. We're so glad to have you here. My name's Lee Callahan. I'm your news director. Thank you so much. It's great to see you all. Thanks for making the trip down to the very green Showware Center. All right, first up, I want to thank our sponsors who've made this night possible. They're out in the lobby, and so please visit them at intermission. We have Burien Toyota and Burien Chevrolet. Woo! I'm gonna stand right here. And we also have the Greater Seattle Business Association is here. They're one of our sponsors. The wonderful Don Willis Furniture up on Lake City Way. Great sponsor. And Xfinity, only from Comcast. Put your hands together. Thank you so much. Now, before I bring out our wonderful panel, we have a special guest star. He's gonna say a few words, but he's decided he's gonna join the panel tonight too. Cool, huh? A progressive leader. He's been serving the 7th Congressional District for the last 23 years. From our nation's capital in the great state of Washington, put your hands together for Congressman Jim McDermott.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. When I was driving down here today, I thought of a story that one of my friends from the northeastern part of the United States told me about the census in 1991, 1990. A young man got out of college and couldn't find a job. Sounds like today, right? And he got a job with the census, and he went out to do his interviews in a rural area, and he found this little house, and he went up and knocked on the door, and he said the door opened about 3 inches, and the voice inside says, "What do you want?" And he said, "Well, I'm here to take the census." And the young man said, "Well, the voice inside, you got it, what is that?" So he said, "Well, once every 10 years, the United States government goes out to find out how many people live in the United States." And the young man said that to him, and the voice inside was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "You came to the wrong place." And the kid said, "Well, what do you mean I came to the wrong place?" And the voice inside said, "I don't know how many people live in the United States." Now, I don't know when I knocked on that door and came up on this stage exactly what you want me to talk about, but I was really grateful for this opportunity from KM 1090 to come here and talk about motivating progressives. This is an election season. I'm sure some of you may have noticed, having suffered through those Republican debates. And this is an important election beyond anything that I've seen in my life. And you can see by my hair, I've seen a few of these events. What hangs in the balance here is whether 32 million people get health care or they don't. Or whether we will continue a senseless war for another decade, or we won't. Or whether the big banks will serve Americans, or they'll continue to serve themselves for your money. If you just remember one thing after watching that healthcare debate, Imagine one less progressive on the Supreme Court and the replacement being appointed by Mitch Romney. For how many years that will mean this country veers more and more into the right ditch. Now, I have some specific ideas about what the Congress is about and what it means for Seattle and what my goals are, but I think a little context is important. I've said to a bunch of people that Congress has been the worst that I have ever seen. I hope you've all read this book by Mann and Ornstein called It's Even Worse Than It Looks. I don't mean just bad or difficult, because I can handle that. The fact that somebody wants to argue or doesn't agree with me, that's not the problem. The problem is that it's been the least productive deliberately. They have deliberately tried not to do anything. We have tackled fewer problems this time than any Congress since 1930. It is an absolute waste. And Cantor, the majority leader in the House, announced about a month ago, we're through legislating. So I guess we'll go there and get our paycheck, but we're not doing anything about the things that are affecting Americans today. And no matter how you measure this whole operation, we have simply not solved the problems of the American people. Now, how much have we acted together? How much have been the bent parts of our competing views? You're not getting any debate about any of the issues. The one way I measure how bad it is has been the amount of real governing that I see. All the major bills I've championed in the House and have gotten into law have been supported by people on the other side. It's very difficult to find anybody who will work with you on putting any kind of legislation through. Most of the big things have been stopped by Mitch McConnell and others because they did not want Obama to have any success at all. They wanted him to run in 2012 with no successes. And in spite of that, we've gotten some things done. We are in a new time. In 2009 and 2010, when the Democrats were in charge of the House, we were very effective. We actually got the health care bill through in that period of time. And we were working against the disaster of the previous 8 years. It was an awful time. We were losing 700,000 jobs each month. I was the chair of the committee that spent the most money in the entire Congress in 2009 and 2010, because I was the one doing the unemployment insurance. And we were losing jobs faster than you could stand it. Now, we still are in some ways there. 1 out of 7 people in this country want a job and can't find one. And when folks are unemployed, they're now unemployed for longer. We've got the longest long-term unemployment we've had ever. Retraining for jobs takes longer. Housing prices are rebounding in some places. In Seattle, and rental costs are also going up. So it's harder and harder to come back from the place you've been when you've been without a job for a couple of years. And this transitioning back to work is expensive. Now, that means we need a strong safety net in this country. And one of the things that you remember the days when we got rid of welfare as we knew it, and everybody thought, well, that's great. That was in times when the economy was going up. And now the economy's going down, and what we did in those years doesn't work. And we really need to rework that to deal with the middle class who are losing their jobs and losing their homes. Helping people deal with foreclosures and unemployment and getting back to work is very difficult. And most people now know that after your unemployment runs out, what do you have? Food stamps. That's the only safety net you are guaranteed in this country. And the House is presently working on a farm bill where they are preparing to cut the food stamps. They do not care about what happens to the middle class in this particular Congress. Now, I went to Congress to work on 3 things. I went there for universal health care and housing and for transportation and the environment. I wanted to do things in those regards. And the way you should judge anybody going to Congress, when you're looking at candidates, are they going there to be somebody, or are they going there to do something? That's how you separate the sheep from the goats in the Congress. And we've got an awful lot of people in Congress today who simply want to be somebody, but they aren't doing anything. Now, I still believe that those issues are the issues. The health care decision was a great day. I've been in politics a long time, and I went over and watched the oral arguments and watched the justices. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm a psychiatrist, so I was watching them, how they acted. And Kennedy and Roberts were struggling trying to figure out what they were going to do on this issue. And I came back to my office and said to my staff, 6-3, we're going to win. I missed on Kennedy, but I got John Roberts. And I'm old enough now that I don't even care why he did it. It doesn't make any difference to me. He did the right thing. That's all I care about. I'm a single-payer guy, and I still believe single-payer is the way to go. And I'm running for Congress because this next Congress is the one where we're going to implement the final pieces to make the healthcare thing work. It's going to go in 2014, and I want to be there when it happens. I think there ought to be a public option in the middle of it. There are those who want to get rid of unemployment insurance, and they say it creates a moral hazard. Now, anybody who's ever been unemployed knows this, their speech is baloney. They say, well, if somebody knows they're going to get a check, they just sit at home and wait for the check. Why go look for a job? That is not what middle-class people do in this country. I lived in a house where my father lost his job twice, and I saw the scramble we had to keep body and soul together, and that is baloney. We need a good, solid unemployment insurance, but we also need the ability to get education and upgrade your skills in an increasingly complex employment situation. Now, I also think that we have to continue to fight this issue of foreclosures. My father said what probably said to every one of you, now when you get old enough and you get some money, buy a house, because that's important. That's where your first savings occurs, and it's the beginning of your being in the middle class. And I went out and bought a house, and so have thousands and thousands of millions of Americans. And to allow the banks to jerk people out of the middle class, which is what happens to you when you get a foreclosure, because you're getting back after one is going to be very, very difficult. And we simply have got to find a way to make it possible to get the banks to actually write down the principal and refinance the loan and give people a chance. In the 1930s, if you lost your job, you backed the car up to the house, threw the furniture up on the top, and set off for California. That's what the Okies were all about. But today, if you own your house in Flint, Michigan, you can't get in the car and drive to California. You got your house and you got everything you own is right there. You can't leave it. So it's a different world that we're dealing with than it was in the 30s, but we can find a way to do it. Now, my feeling is that the needs of a progressive society never end. And I'm going to push every day for a fair, stable banking system. I'm appalled that there's so many in Congress who think that what's going on makes sense. Here we are after the collapse in 2008. It's a gift that just won't keep giving to the banks. They look at the LIBOR scandal this week, right? That's 4 years after all that happened, 2 years after we passed Dodd-Frank, and still this kind of stuff is going on. We need to go back to Glass-Steagall. And I just had a thought that I hadn't got in my speech here, but Bob Hasagawa is pushing a bill in this state for a state bank, and you ought to be supporting it. As long as we don't regulate derivatives, Wall Street's going to keep gambling with your deposits, and that ought to be stopped. I absolutely think there is no reason for that. After the election, I'm waiting for the president to do what I really think needs to be done in this country. He needs to put out on the table a $1 trillion infrastructure bill. Nobody grumbled at Eisenhower when he said we're going to build a highway system all over this country. That wasn't wrong. And that infrastructure is both physical infrastructure and human infrastructure. I believe that there has to be a better way for us to deal with, let's say, doctors. If we're going to have a health care bill and we need primary care physicians, we ought to have something like the military has. When the military wants officers, they have something called ROTC. Everybody knows what it is. You give them an education, you give them a stipend, and they come out and they owe the American people 5 years of service. Nobody thinks that's communism or socialism or some kind of bad thing. Medical school ought to be free it should be free for any doctor who's willing to spend 5 years in an underserved area of the country, serving ordinary people, not making a lot of money as a specialist somewhere. The same is true for nursing. The same is true for teachers. We have saddled our students with huge debts. It all started with Reagan. When Reagan took over California in 1966, the University of California was free. It didn't cost you anything. You just went there and got your education because they were investing in the intellect of your young people. So what I'm looking for is a president who will do, after this election, start this whole conversation, because we have to start investing again. We can't think we're going to get out of it if we don't. We're also going to have to look at the tax structure. There isn't anybody in this room, or really in this state or anywhere else, who thinks the present tax structure is fair. Now, they may think it's good for them, but they know in their hearts it's not fair. It is not fair when the richest are paying 15% and the ordinary are nothing, or they're putting their money in Cayman Islands. Wait till we get Romney out there in the campaign. I mean, that is another issue that's not going to go away in this campaign, is where's his money? His father was willing to put all his tax returns out there for 4 or 5 years back. This guy won't even give us this year's. And my view is that is going to be one of those issues that we're going to ride right up to the election. Now, I think most of us would be willing to go back to a tax structure like we had under Clinton. I mean, the economy was booming, right? People were paying taxes, and we weren't going into debt. Everybody stands around saying, oh, debt, debt, debt. Where do you think the debt came from? The debt came from the Congress giving all these tax breaks to people on the top, and that's got to end. Let me say just a little bit about what I think about here in Seattle. We've got some stuff on the ballot. I think it's important that we rebuild the seawall. The next how many in here believe we won't have an earthquake in Seattle? Put your hand up. I'd like to see if there's anybody who would say we're not going to have an earthquake. We have the wrong kind of earthquake. We're going to have the whole city slide down into the bay, because the seawall is in such shape it's got to be replaced. So we got to do that ourselves. The world isn't going to do it for us. We also have to protect the University of Washington. University of Washington is the number one recipient of federal money, research money. Number one in the United States. And it is a tremendous energy for driving biotech industries and scientific stuff and all of what's going on in this city. If you look at what makes this city run, one of them is the University of Washington and the research that's being done there. And as we cut, as people are talking about in Washington, D.C., they're cutting the life out of all the universities around the country, and that means the end of research. Things like, I was down at Boeing Field, some of you saw it on TV, when the space craft came in that they're going to put over in the museum, the trainer. And you realize that we're not sending shots up there anymore. When we want to send lunch to our people on the space lab, we have to go over to the Russians and say, would you take this lunch up to those guys? That's where the United States is right now. That's got to be reversed, and I think it can be. Now, I believe that the environment is terribly important. And I don't know how many times we voted. I think it was 6 times we voted to repeal the EPA, as though this program put in by that, you remember that terrible radical Richard Nixon? God, he was awful. I tell you, we were so glad to get rid of him. Well, he put the EPA in because he knew Americans wanted clean air and clean water. And these guys are trying to rip it out, just like they spent 33 times trying to rip out the health care bill. I mean, this has been so dysfunctional, and the environment is getting worse. As you look at the drought in this country, it is the worst drought in recorded history in our country. Okay? We haven't all, I mean, I'm not saying this back to wherever, but I'm saying as long as we've kept records, this drought is as bad as it's been. And people who don't think there's climate change simply aren't paying attention to what's going on in the world around them. I went into government to do some things, and I was moved by a couple of people's statements. One of them was Robert Kennedy, who said, "Some men see things as they are and ask why. I dream of things as they never were and ask, why not?" And my belief is that Gandhi was absolutely right when he said, you must be the change that you want to see in the world. And you and I, in this election, have the ability and the power and the strength to make this become the kind of world we want it to be. We can sit and wring our hands and say, oh, money and all that stuff. Grassroots, talking to people, getting people, sitting down, going to meetings, doing all. We got to do some of that so that people get out of the apathy. I was out doorbelling today in Snohomish County. It's amazing the number of people who don't know that there is an election on the 7th of August. You got to tell your neighbors, get up off the couch and go down and vote, or go out in the kitchen and get the ballot that's laying right there. It's all, we've made it so easy for people, and yet how do we get them to sit down and actually mark the ballot? And you got to do that with your neighbors. Go around, look around on the kitchen counter for the ballots, because they're laying there. I know where mine is, and bet you know where yours is, because they're now coming out. So you got to start getting people to understand that if they don't vote, the other guys win. That's what it's all about. And I thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to talk about it. Keep up the good work.
Congressman Jim McDermott, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much, Congressman.
Thank you.
He's going to join our panel. This is your chair. That's you.
Right.
He's going to join our panel tonight. Before I bring everybody out, before I bring our big panel out, I have a note from Stephanie Miller.
Oh,
1090 people, I am so sorry I cannot make it. I am much too intoxicated to find my way to the ShoWare Center. I'm so mean. She's not even here to defend herself. Actually, she has the Sexy Liberal Road Show this weekend. They're actually in LA. And she invites you to come to the September 29th Sexy Liberal Show at the Paramount. And you can just go to am1090seattle.com to purchase information and tickets. Thank you very much. All right. First, our moderator for tonight, the cat wrangler himself, and former political writer for the Seattle Times. Please welcome Mr. David Postman. Hi, David. And now for our first panelist. Please put your hands together for our own local progressive hero and author of Ronald Reagan, My Father at 100, Ron Reagan!
Woo! Woo!
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Thank
Good to see you.
Hey, Ron.
Ron
Good to stick
Reagan!
around, Jim. Thank you.
Sitting right next to the
Hey, guys.
congressman.
Glad you're here. Thank you. Oh, sit down. Come on.
All right. And now you hear him on the weekends. He's on with another host that's going to be up here tonight on the, what's it called? Ring of Fire! I hate when that happens. Hate when that happens. And also, you can hear his wonderful podcast, The Majority Report. We link it at am1090seattle.com. Please welcome Mr. Sam Cedar! Welcome, Sam. Sam, look in the front row.
There she is. I am Sam Cedar.
All right, and maybe the funniest, well, definitely the funniest talker, progressive or not, the queen of our airwaves of the afternoon. Please welcome Ms. Randy Rhodes. Randy Rhodes. Here she is.
Hi.
What fun.
Long time no see.
Oh, that's the way it should be. Welcome, Randy. All right. Every afternoon you hear our next host serving up justice on a daily basis. Stand up again. It's Norman Goldman.
You're a good man.
There he is, Norman Goldman, ladies and gentlemen.
Randy.
No.
Hey, Norman. All right, Norman. Woo. All right, esteemed trial lawyer, fighting the good fight against all the big corporate bad guys, host of Ring of Fire, bring about Mike Papantonio. Mike Pep.
Hiya, Congressman.
Can
you hiding over there?
Come right up through here. There you go.
Good job.
Welcome, Mike. And finally, New York Times best-selling author, 23 books, the professor of Morning Talk Radio, Mr. Tom
I gotta write a book.
Hartman. All right, ladies and gentlemen, your panel tonight for the 7th annual AM 1090 Forum. Now we turn it over. Oh, and your questions are what is fueling our discussion tonight, so thank you very much. And here is David Postman.
Okay. Yes, we have your questions. People have been submitting questions for weeks. Great questions, lots of questions. They cover the world. Frankly, I think of the last couple of years, maybe a little more upbeat than we saw in the last couple of years. So I don't know if that means anything or not, but we'll see. And this will be the last you hear of me because these guys don't listen to questions.
We've warned him. We don't listen to you. your
No,
question.
my question.
Their
You're just going to listen to me. So I'm just going to curl up in the fetal position after a minute. Congressman McDermott is going to stay with us for a little while, so and then have to go. But some of you had questions for him in the hopes that he would join us, and we'll start with one of those. This is from Chaz in Issaquah. Congressman, would you agree to sponsor a bill in Congress to impeach Judge Clarence Thomas? I told you they were a little more positive this year.
I would like to have a couple of very good justices come on. I've been there 4 times before the court. I've never heard him ask a question. I don't know what he's thinking about. He sits and looks at the ceiling. And I really have no idea what role he thinks he plays on the Supreme Court. It is a legacy of previous administrations, and I'm not sure impeachment is correct, but I certainly would like to make sure we don't lose the 5 majority that we had the other day.
Does anybody think there's any chance of any impeachment of him or maybe any other justice that...
Maybe when he was staring at the ceiling maybe when he's staring at the ceiling, he's thinking of all the money that he and his wife make from groups that represent, the interests against health care, for instance, a case that he was going to sit on soon. It strikes me as odd that Thomas and Scalia, in particular, who also gets money from all sorts of groups he speaks before and all, and then sits on cases, famously for Scalia going duck hunting or some sort of small animal killing with Dick Cheney before judging the case that Cheney was involved in, the Energy Commission. How do these people get away with this?
This is the most political court we've seen probably in 50 or 80 years, back to the time of Roosevelt. And it is appalling what they've gotten away with, and we are struggling with how to deal with that, because if you try to impeach somebody and you fail, then that's clearly it wasn't a bad thing they were doing. Mm-hmm. We know it's bad what Thomas is doing, and Scalia. The whole idea of being a justice is you're supposed to sit and listen to the evidence and then talk. He goes out and makes money on talking speeches in which he is already told what his decision is on a lot of things. It's absolutely unacceptable for a justice.
I think it's unlikely, obviously. I mean, we can see that there's not a tremendous amount of will to impeach. But it isn't just that they're political. Because I think there's a very good argument the Supreme Court has always been political. Us as liberals and on the left are just on the wrong side of that right now. But the problem with Thomas is not just that he's political. The problem is that his wife is making money off of direct ties to plaintiffs who are in front of that court. And there is, without a doubt, he should be recusing himself. And I think there's corruption there that goes beyond politics.
There is a remedy that's halfway. I mean, there's only been one Supreme Court justice in the history of the United States. I believe it was Samuel Chase in the early 1900s who was impeached. He was successfully impeached in the House. He was not convicted in the Senate. So there's not much precedent for that. But Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution clearly states that the Supreme Court shall conduct itself under the regulations defined by Congress. Congress could easily pass a law, totally legal, totally, constitutional, easily pass a law that simply says that the Supreme Court has to abide by the Federal Code of Judicial Conduct that every other federal judge does, which would immediately throw Scalia and Thomas into a position of committing either felonies or forcing them to recuse themselves.
Yeah, I think one thing we've missed is this is not just about Scalia. I remember trying a case, it was a 3-month trial in Texas, and during that time, there was an election took place down in Texas. Karl Rove had been down there saying that what we want to do is nullify legislation. You see, we've paid attention to the Senate races. We've paid attention to what happens in the White Houses. We want you to be reelected. But while those elections are going on, we missed what the right wing was up to, and that is to pack the courts from the trial level, and I'm in front of them every day. From here, I tried cases all over this country, from here to LA, Chicago, all over. Now, here's what they figured out. When Obama, for example, passes a health care bill, we have a shot. Now, we think it's over, for example, in the Supreme Court. It's not. What's going to come up is all types of iterations that are going to be decided in the federal court level. Right now, they control 72% of the federal judiciary at the appellate level. At the trial level, they now control 68%. I am in front of them every day at all levels. They're winning there. We're still paying attention who's going to win a race in our local locality. The race is about the judiciary, and we've lost it right now. And unfortunately, we've got to get Obama focusing on the idea that that if he were to leave office right now, he would leave having made less judicial appointments than we've seen in my lifetime. And so this is an important issue. It's not just about Scalia. It's across the board, and Congress has ignored this. Not intentionally ignored it, but while we looked at health care, the courts have been packed. They're changing politics for 2 generations.
With the question,
That is true.
everything that Pap just said is correct, and we see it every day. With the question being impeach Clarence Thomas, my answer would be it's a good start. But let me suggest something bolder, which is that we need to go to those who care about politics and say the entire federal judiciary needs to be restructured. We need a constitutional amendment to put term limits on the Supreme Court. The same constitutional amendment should put term limits on appellate court and district court judges, and we need to expand the number of Supreme Court judges to like 17 and give them fixed 10-year terms so that we can't have this kind of 5 people overturning massive amounts of democratically enacted policy. It's simply outrageous.
Well, the first thing that we have to do, if any of this is on our radar screen or doable or possible, is take back the House. Because Congressman McDermott is serving with some of the most irresponsible ideologues I've ever seen in the entire time I've been covering politics, and that's since the 90s, the early 90s. We don't have the Judiciary Committee. When they have the Judiciary Committee, what do? They impeach our president. We sit there and we go, well, there's no precedent. They go, we're impeaching them. Hey, over what? The meaning of the word is. Really? Well, that's fabulous. And then we lose a whole year of our lives watching this, this comedy show on the TV, and we wonder, how come we got NAFTA, and because they were impeaching our president for a year. So, we got to take back the House. When we vote this year, it's not, listen, I really firmly believe in my heart of hearts, I do, that Obama's going to be the president again. I knew the Supreme Court was going to uphold, the American Health Care Act. I can see this one coming from a mile away. But if we give Obama the presidency and don't give the House back to us and don't do something in the Senate, we had a majority. Congressman, we had a majority for 10 minutes in the Senate. They say 2 years. But remember, they held up Al Franken. Ted Kennedy died. We had the Senate for 40 minutes. Truly, that's what we had.
That's right.
So let's do something about these things. And then the whole menu is, for us to choose from.
And Randy, some of those Democrats were Ben Nelson of Nebraska,
That's
and
right.
Joe Lieberman, who's not even
Joe.
a Democrat, and Mary Landrieu of Louisiana, and they shake down the president and say, I will join the other side and filibuster unless you give me what I want. And I kept calling on Bernie Sanders to say, Bernie, do the same thing. Hold up the whole Senate. But he's too nice. He's too civil. He's too decent. And the Democratic Party has to stop being nice and stop being decent and kick him in the nuts.
And if I can, in Bernie's defense, he did get a rider put into the Health Care Act that created 10,000 community health care centers across the United States that not only provide medical care but dental services as well, which is a BFD, and he damn near brought the thing down to get that in. He did force the president's hand on that.
Let me ask you a question about our senior senator, Patty Murray. This is from Don in Franks. What do you think about Patty Murray's idea about allowing all tax cuts to expire, then introduce tax cuts only for those with earnings under $250,000 a year? Is it a good idea, and is there any chance in hell?
I don't want to say what it would be because we have a congressman here, and God knows, there's YouTube and all that crap, right? But let's just say it would put Grover Norquist in a really interesting position. So I'm for that.
Oh, it's not only possible that it could happen, you need to do nothing for that to happen.
Right.
It is where all the leverage is, and that's what the reporting has been in the past week or so, is that the Democrats have come around to that strategy. I don't want to put, again, anybody on the hot seat, but that's the reporting has been. That's the strategy, and it's the most obvious strategy in the world. Let the Republicans vote against the tax cut for people making under $250,000. Frankly, I say let them expire and then don't bring anything. There's no reason for tax cuts right now.
Well, it's one of the real advantages of letting it expire is that the deficit is almost cut in half instantly
Right.
by that action alone.
And the Republicans don't have to vote for a tax increase.
Right.
Either. They're off the hook. It's very gracefully. They
saved them.
It just happens. And there you are.
Yeah.
But the game of politics is a game of leverage. And the Democrats, if they just do nothing, which frankly politicians are really good at doing nothing.
As we've seen.
So pardon me, Congressman, but
No, the House of Representatives actually, when Nancy Pelosi was Speaker, got some amazing stuff done.
Yeah, they did.
Just
They
all died
very
in
affirmative,
the
very
Senate.
affirmative
And this
stuff.
guy helped a lot of it to happen. This is one of the, Congressman McDermott is one of the best members of the House of Representatives, far enough.
and when Nancy Pelosi was getting all those 400 great bills through, why wasn't Harry Reid killing the filibuster in the Senate the way that Bill Frist was threatening to do it over George W. Bush appointees in 2005 when there were 14 federal judges being filibustered by the Senate? And Bill Frist said, I'm going to bring down the filibuster with the nuclear option. And I was praying, oh, please, God, let it happen, because then we can get rid of this darn thing once and for all.
I was just saying that we have a question from Everett Woodinville, which is exactly that, which is why not just call their bluff and say, go ahead, stop everything.
The most important vote for this country is the first vote that's taken in the Senate. The day they vote to adopt the rules, the first thing they do is they gavel the meeting to order, and then they adopt the rules. When they adopt these rules that include this crazy filibuster stuff, it's all over. Now, last year, the Udalls and a couple of people, Sherrod Brown and some others, tried to hold out and tried to get some changes. But I frankly think the country is going down the drain if they don't change the ability for one person to hold up the entire thing. The Poland, if you read the book, Mitchell wrote a book about Poland. And Poland had a parliament in the 1600s. The Sejm was controlled by the one vote. If one person disagreed, nothing happened. And you see what happened to Poland. And that's exactly what's happening to this country, because one person can stop us from solving problems.
Yep.
It's simply got to be ended.
When you think about it, that is an awesome amount of power for anybody to have in a country of 300 million people. That is just too much power to give to any single human. And that's what every single senator has in their hand. The power to bring everything to a screeching halt. The power to take every single bit of progress and just say, no. And you might think it's leverage, but I think politics is perception. And somehow the money makes the Republicans seem like instead of they're bringing everything to a screeching halt, the money on the TV and the ads and the radio and the collusion between the Heritage Foundation and the conservative talk radio crowd and the Hillsdale colleges and all this money to make them seem heroic because Obama's going to take us into socialism, Marxism, Maoism, fascism, you know, and they're standing there as the stalwart, they're the wall between you and this terrible decline. People perceive them as being heroic, and they're literally selling this country. I mean, it's just the Bain Capital model that we're seeing where, look, Bush just loaded us up with all this debt. Just like Bain comes into your company, they price the company with future earnings included and all the assets, and then they say, okay, that's what the company is worth, so we're going to take all that cash and give it to Bain, and we're going to replace it with a note. We're going to replace it with debt. That's what George Bush did to this country. We're not even allowed to talk about him. He's like Voldemort. You can't even say his name. I don't get it. But it's the Bain model, and then they stand there and brick by brick by brick, they're foreclosing on the United States, and they're selling it off to the highest bidder. We have 17 angry white guys with unlimited resources buying not just a senator or a congressman or a president, they're buying the entire government this time. They're having a fire sale, and they're buying the whole thing.
We got a few questions about the shooting in Colorado. Obviously not a lot, only because it just happened as the questions came in. And the few that we have certainly talk about gun control. So one thing I'd be curious, whoever has anything to add on it, does anyone think something's going to happen with legislation related to guns in any way, shape, or form because of what happened in Colorado?
No.
I'm going to start carrying a gun. I am.
That'll be the only change, I think.
When I came to Congress, there was an incident in California in a schoolyard in which a number of kids were gunned down. And Pete Stark came with a bill, and we passed a ban on assault weapons in the United States. But it was done with a 10-year
Right. Oh, sunset.
clause on it.
Sunset.
So at the end of 10 years, 2006, it came to a vote again. By that point, we had Ms. McCarthy from New York, whose husband and son were killed on the Long Island Railroad. We went around and tried, and we couldn't get the votes, and we still haven't got the votes to ban these guys with a banana clip that's got 100 rounds in it. And what happened in Colorado, we saw Columbine. It isn't like we haven't had experience. The Brady Commission put out a list of 65 pages of incidents that have occurred since Columbine. And yet the Congress sits there as though this is too hot to touch.
We have a
So
Congress
in one
member
sense,
who
I
was
feel
shot
sorry.
in the head in a supermarket parking lot. And if you think that the NRA isn't powerful, think about that. Think about one of their colleagues was shot in the face, in the head, and we're watching her rehabilitation, and we're watching her be welcomed back by her colleagues on the floor, and we're all crying, and the NRA is sitting there saying, Obama's going to take away your guns. You know, they are waiting for Monday to see if people like us and the administration and anybody on our side is going to start calling for gun control. Right. You know, and we can't because there's an election. I mean, it's so warped, it's so crazy, and that's why, you know, I might just start carrying a gun. I live in Florida where they have the stand your ground law, and George Zimmerman has become a freaking national hero. He did a 1-hour infomercial on the TV the other night to raise money for his lawyer, O'Mara, who's like, oh, this guy spends $36,000 in 18 months, so I better get some money in the bank so I can get paid. And it will never go to a jury. He will go in front of a judge. It will be a stand your ground hearing, which is just a bench trial. There's no jury. And he'll say, I was in fear for my life, and this kid was, you know, pounding my head into the sidewalk. What was I going to do? I was carrying, so I shot him. And they'll say, okay, go. Meanwhile, there's another woman named Marissa Alexander in Florida. She happens to be black, but she's a PhD, okay? She went all the way in school, did everything right. Her husband was an abusive husband. The husband comes into the house where he doesn't live anymore. She's got 2 restraining orders. He comes into the house. She runs into the garage to go get her into her car to get out of there. Realizes she doesn't have her car keys. But she's got a gun in the garage. She shoots into the ceiling, kills no one, wounds no one. No one gets hurt. She's protecting her kids. She just got 20 years. 20 years. The justice system is gone. Remember when Bush was putting in all those little kids from Jerry Falwell's university, Liberty University?
Right.
And, I used to call that girl Agent Starling. She was like that little blonde girl, and she said, "Oh, I thought I took an oath to the president." Remember her?
Yes.
They replaced career professionals in our prosecutors' offices, in our DA's offices, in our state attorney, with these kids from Jerry Falwell's university who've never seen the inside of a courtroom. I mean, they've been after the justice system forever. They won't confirm any of Obama's appointments. We couldn't even get Elizabeth Warren to be head of the Consumer Protection Bureau, which, by the way, is the best thing that has happened for the foreclosure mess, for our credit card mess.
With all due respect, I don't, as good an idea as banning assault rifles might be, and what we're really talking is assault-type rifles, semi-automatic rifles that are modeled after military weapons, I don't think banning a particular kind of gun is really going to solve the problem, because you're going to still have Glock 9mm with, semi-automatic also. I think we have to change our relationship to guns in this country. We fetishize guns, the way we fetishize the military, the way we fetishize violence. And you hear some of the comments from Louis Gohmert, for instance, from Texas, a congressman, and others as well, very commonly talking about, well, if there'd just been one other guy there in that theater in Aurora, Texas, or somebody else had guns, was packing heat, they could have taken that guy out. Well, think about that. What if everybody in that theater was carrying a gun? And this guy stands up and he starts plinking away, and everybody in the theater whips out their piece. Now, none of these people are trained, and none of these people know that everybody else that's around them with a gun out now isn't maybe in cahoots with the guy who's up on stage shooting. So people start blazing away now. Some of the people were wounded not in that theater, but in the next theater. Because you know what? 40 caliber bullets go through walls. So think about 200 people suddenly pulling out their 40 caliber pistols, blazing away in a closed theater, thinking they're going to shoot the bad guy, and killing people theaters away here.
Yeah.
A modest proposal. Why don't we start treating guns like cars? You can't have a gun, you can't buy a gun until you're, 16 years old or so, let's say. You have to have a license, you have to take a test. You have to prove you know how to use your gun, you know how to
They'll
clear.
say
No, we're not,
right to a car.
you still have you had a right to a car. There's no constitutional restriction against driving a car, is there?
No.
So you have a right to drive a car then. In the early days of cars, when cars first arrived, they were just smelly horse and buggies, Nobody had a license. Kids drove. You drove all over the road. There were no real rules. And people were getting run over left and right, of course. And they said, we got to do something about this. We can't just let anybody drive any way they want. Let's have some sensible rules, make people get licensed, and have age restrictions. Do the same thing with guns.
Ron, early on, I think, is in this conversation, this tells the story. In this conversation, we haven't talked about the heart of the issue. Now, we handled some of the first gun cases that were filed in New York. After we focused it, what we found that the NRA has done such an incredible job isolating themselves from the people who make these guns, the people who make the big profits, the connections to black markets in Europe. We had a pretty good attack created until it was legislatively taken away, and the attack was to start deconstructing parts of this whole story. The deconstruction begins by deconstructing who is the NRA, and then deconstructing who's making the money. You have to deconstruct the various parts of the big picture. Up here, we all deal with big issues all the time, but I was listening to see, okay, how do we deconstruct the issue? And you have to do it in small parts. We had I feel like some of the best lawyers in America that I've worked with on everything from tobacco to Wall Street cases, and we knew what to do, and we had the plan. It was to attack the image. Okay, the image of the NRA being one of you, the NRA being your neighbor, and then tying it up to where are the guns coming from? They're coming from the black market manufacturers in Europe and Asia. And so we spent a lot of time, a lot of effort trying to deconstruct it. We had it done, and legislatively it was taken away.
Congressman, there's another piece of this for you, which is this is from Sandra in Seattle. Again, related to the shooting. Will it make any difference with access or coverage for mental health services? Is there any chance that we can get those things to be more readily available, more funding, or anything else?
Well, I hope so. Certainly, an accountable or Affordable Care Act is going to do that. That's going to make it a lot easier for people to afford it, to go and see someone. Whether or not we will help those people, and school people will see someone, and people will see in various situations that there is somebody who actually needs some help. That's really a real weakness in our society because of the stigma that we've placed on mental health. To say to somebody, you know, you ought to go see somebody, or let me take you to see somebody, is very difficult in this society, and that's a real unfortunate part. I don't know how we've struggled in the Congress. I mean, we've gotten parity for payment with health care and mental health care, but how do you get people, you've got the perfect example right now. One soldier a day commits suicide.
Wow.
You've got one soldier a day in our military between the ages of 20 and 24 killing themselves, and yet we haven't figured out a way to spot them and help them before they figure they're so hopeless that the only thing to do is stick a gun in their mouth.
Yeah.
That's really, it is a very difficult problem. I wish I had an easy answer. I've got to run. I got another event.
Okay.
So
Thank you, Congressman.
Go get him, Congressman.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up just a little bit on the point that Pat made, because at the end of the day, it's very important, I think also rhetorically, to see that the NRA essentially is doing to the American public what a GE that would pour its waste into the Hudson River is doing. Their business essentially is profitable because they can externalize the cost. And in this case, the cost is that a lot of people get shot and die. And that is part of their business plan. It's not the goal of their business plan per se. It's just a byproduct that they're willing to tolerate because we're willing not to call them on it. And so I think it's really important. I think demonizing the NRA is one of the most important things you can come up with, frankly, when it comes, because 70% of the U.S. population would agree with Ron's proposal. Even the majority of NRA members probably would agree. And so the issue is less about convincing the American public. We may have a problem with certain Supreme Court justices, but if you really do point out that the NRA is making money and externalizing that cost of innocent people dying, I think that's the quickest way to get to some type of meaningful change with our gun laws.
David, let me add one more quick point. There is a connection. There's a connection between the law and politics here, and this is far from over. From the founding of our nation until about 3 years ago, the United States Supreme Court, through all those years, tread very carefully on the area of the Second Amendment. There was just a very small group of cases. The most significant one was like 1938, and they never wanted to really say what the the Second Amendment really said. And the question was, are there two rights in there or just one? And the folks like us say there's one right in the Second Amendment, the right of a militia to be armed, regulated by state governors. The NRA type said there are two rights in there. There's the militia, and then there's a right of individuals to just pack heat to their heart's content. And it was only 3 years ago in the Heller case out of Washington, D.C., where this activist, radical Supreme Court said, we'll answer the questions that none of the other Supreme Courts before us had the guts to answer. And they said there is two rights. There were two rights. They answered the question. And then a year and a half ago, they answered another question in the McDonald case out of Chicago, when they declared Chicago's ban on handguns unconstitutional, they said that the Second Amendment applies to all the states and the counties, and therefore, just like with Citizens United, federal law and their ruling rules everything. Well, what's interesting there is that Scalia, our friend Antonin Scalia, said, and he went out of his way to say this because he was very nervous. He said, we're not saying that states and localities can't do gun regulation. We accept that reasonable regulation of the right to bear arms is acceptable and we'll deal with it on a case-by-case basis. And so there have only been 2 cases, and right now we really don't know what the law is. We don't know where states and localities can regulate and where they have to stop. And that's going to be, it'll be the United States Supreme Court over the next 20, 30 years or more, deciding on a case-by-case basis. They'll take one case out of one state or one county and say, this regulation goes too far. They'll take another one out of another place and say, that one's okay. And that's the process of the law. But who is on the Supreme Court in the next 20 and 30 years is really important to decide those individual cases which flesh out just where the line is drawn between reasonable regulation and where the Second Amendment says, no, you can't go there. So please don't think it's just, don't throw up your hands and say, the game's over, I guess that's it. The evildoers won, we lost, let's all go home now, America's lost. It's not. It's never lost. It always, the next fight is always there.
That's true.
We have a couple of questions from someone named Gerard. Is Gerard here by any chance? I don't know where the city's from, but there's probably another. A very prolific question asker. So I'll get a couple of his quick ones in for him. One, can anyone explain why closing Guantanamo Bay is taking so long, or how we can tell candidates in this election we want it closed? You never hear about it.
Very simple explanation. It takes money to do it, and Congress refuses to appropriate the money.
Yeah, that is
That's
the
pretty
answer.
simple.
That is the answer, yeah.
Asked and answered.
The president tried to close it in Congress. He tried to transfer the prisoners here. That was a campaign promise, and Congress said we won't pay for it. What's he going to do, put it on his credit card? I mean, how's he going to move the guys,
Yeah.
All right, another Gerard question, which I love the way it starts. Nothing against the men on the panel. They're all rock stars for sure. But how can we get more women like Randy Rhodes on Progressive Radio?
Oh, okay.
Glass ceiling in Progressive Radio.
Well,
You're our chick band.
you realize Stephanie and I can't procreate, right? So you're going to have to make your own is what you're going to have to do. Thank you. That's really flattering.
Okay, no, so
You make your own. You want me to make them? Okay, let me make a talk show.
Cloning.
okay.
I saw, I hope you're here. There's a woman who is writing button slogans, and they're hysterical. They were for sale out there. Where are you? You are hysterical. She has a button out there. What did it say? It said, don't tell me I came from your rib. You came from my vagina. Don't bring it up if you can't say the word.
Let me ask you about third party. This is a question first from Bill in Seattle. He says the Green Party's Green New Deal for America has everything a good progressive supports. If I vote for them, am I throwing my vote away or building for the future?
Throwing your vote away.
You are
Yeah,
definitely
right
right.
now, throwing your vote away.
I'll be happy to jump in on that one because I've made that an issue. It's gotten me into a lot of trouble. There is a thing called the Vermont Progressive Party. You can find them on the internet. I spoke at their state convention last November, and I've had them on the show, and I will continue to have them. And in fact, Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate for president, will be on my show this coming Wednesday at 3:30 in the afternoon. I believe, and I know this is a very unpopular thing to say, that the National Democratic Party is Republican light. They're half the fat cat of our regular Republicans. And I'm sorry, but I know Pat will back me up here, that when you are settling a lawsuit, it's about leverage. If you've got a strong case and the other side knows that you're going to take them to a trial and beat the stuffing out of them, you're going to get a very favorable settlement. If you have a weak case, the other side knows that, and you're going to get a bad settlement. Your kids, when they're little kids, they're negotiating with you. They say, Mommy, can I have a glass of water? Now I got to go to the bathroom. You know, there's always something. Kids know how to negotiate. They have leverage. They can annoy the hell out of you until you let them do what they want. It's a skill that we forget as we get older. But it's all about leverage. And sadly, the National Democratic Party takes us for granted. Rahm Emanuel says, where's the left going to go? And they found out in 2010 when we went to the couch and didn't get off. And they got their heads handed to them. And the message they took was, oh, we need to be more like the Republicans.
Well,
that's a great idea.
I don't think you need to reinvent. I don't think you need
put some leverage on.
Well, here's the leverage. Here's the leverage. If you were to describe what's happened to the Democratic Party, you have what I've heard the term Reubenites. So you've got the pro-Wall Street types that all of us are offended by. And then you have true progressives. You have people like everybody in this audience that understands that there's some things that we don't negotiate. There's some things we don't give up on. And what we've forgotten is that we have an infrastructure, okay? The infrastructure is the Democratic Party. It has just been temporarily taken over by the wrong people. Because what we think, except the people in this room, is that the cavalry's coming, okay? Somebody's going to show up and they're going to pull the sword out of the stone and they're going to show us real leadership. And again, we're going to have those wonderful days, those FDR days when we were proud of what the Democrats stood for, when we changed people's lives in such a positive way that we were proud. We still feel that pride today, don't we, when we think of the FDR years. That hasn't escaped us. It's only escaped us if we say, well, the way to do this is to come up with some third new party. What we have to do is we have to simply take control back of the party. And what I mean when I say the cavalry is not coming, you've heard me say this so many times if you listen to the show, is we're raised on this idea of watching Westerns where the bandits have the good guys pinned down. The wagons are turned over, bullets are flying, hell, they're out of water, no food. They're in their last desperate effort, and the cavalry comes over the hill. Bugles blaring, flags in front of them. We grew up with that, didn't we? And we believe in our heart, we've been programmed to believe that the cavalry's coming. They're not. They're not coming. The cavalry's not going to save the Democratic Party. It's you. You're the cavalry. You're the cavalry. And so what I'm suggesting is we don't give up. We don't give up on something that we have this infrastructure. We try to make it better.
Well, and to that point, let me just add the way to make the Democratic Party, there are two ways to make the Democratic Party the real Democratic Party. One is to do what Pat and Tom has talked about, which is infiltrate and run into primaries, which is the Grover Norquist Koch brothers way. You say you're either going to do what we want or we're going to primary you and kick you out, which I think is wonderful. And I encourage everybody, if you listen to the show, I'm always saying, I think you sound like a marvelous member of House of Representatives. I mean, I'm encouraging people to run, get involved. But the other way to do it is to look at the Democratic Party and say, here's this other group. Now, you're either going to give us a real Democrat for this race, whether it's a House or a state Senate, state assembly, or we're going to run somebody against you. We will intentionally split the vote, and we will sink your sorry ass because you're not worth a damn. And when we've done this to you a few times, maybe you'll take us seriously and you'll start giving us real Democrats, and we won't have to have a third party. We won't have to have a third party as leverage, as a threat. And I suggest those two things can happen simultaneously, and I think we ought to get to it. I'm sorry, Randy.
Go ahead.
It's okay. It's okay. No, I was gonna talk to you about the primary idea. I think all politics is local, and you know, people sort of throw away these congressional races or their city council races, and you know how important it is. I mean, we all now see everything that happens locally, and so primarying somebody who is just, you know, pretending to be a Democrat because they looked at a demographic chart and said, oh, this Seattle area seems to be, you know, so I'll be a Democrat, but has no heart of a Democrat or no brain of a Democrat or no soul of a Democrat and doesn't care about his constituents or doesn't care about anything except where are they going to call to dial for dollars for the net. Primary them. You know, primary them. Just put somebody up against them and knock on doors and be in the supermarket parking lots and let people mock you and say, well, you don't have enough money. I'm going to show you. 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 And keep on doing it until, just like the Tea Party made their presence known, these Republicans are terrified. And they're a bunch of wackadoodles. I mean, they're not even professional about what they're saying or doing, are they? They have no experience serving, which is fine. If it works for them, it should work for us. Other than that, listen, every time I talk about this, I always say, hey, you know, in dictatorships, you only get one choice. That's all you get is one choice. Here in democracy, we get two.
All right, we're going to have to take
come
an
on,
intermission, but Sam, do you want to jump in?
Well, just quickly, I think
it would be great to have 3 parties, 4 parties, 5 parties, and the only way to do that is to get rid of the Electoral College. That's the problem.
I think Norman's formula is a good one, but it's also a notion of overplaying your hand, and we're not at the point. And frankly, the Green Party has not, over time, proven that they can build a sustained movement.
I agree.
And that's the problem.
Right.
So I think there's value of having Jill Stein on, or having Rocky Anderson on, or bringing these other candidates on to talk about the issues that are being left on this side of the table. But if you're in a swing state, the dynamic that you're talking about is just no one buys it. Their movement is not strong enough to have that leverage, and there is a notion that you can overplay your hand. And that's the problem. And when you do have the infrastructure there, it's not just a question of primarying people, it's literally putting people on, and I think, Tom, you've talked about this quite a bit, getting people in on these nominating committees on a local level. They're just sitting there, and it's a much a smaller hill to climb to take over a local nominating process than it is introducing a third party into our system, which is bound to split
the
them.
precinct committee people, who any of you can volunteer to become, are the ones who do 2 really important things. They choose all the people who are running in the primary, and they write the platform for the party. And it's in almost every state and every precinct all over the country. It's mostly volunteers, and very often they go unfilled. And that's the Tea Party. You know, I forget the name of the Concord Coalition produced a whole series of YouTubes that the Tea Party used nationwide. You can still find them. They're on their website, about how the committee precinct people are the most powerful political figures in America.
They are.
And
all local.
And if we Tea Partiers take over the precinct committee chairs in individual Republican districts, and there's going to be 5 people in the primary, and all 5 of them are Tea Partiers, doesn't matter who wins, the Tea Party wins.
Right.
And that's exactly what they did, and it's what we should be doing.
And
Let
you
me
know
just,
what the dirty
if I
little
can,
secret is, real
if I-
quick? No one shows up to the precinct meetings. That's just something you should know. No one shows up.
May I-
Mark this time for when I officially lost control.
Okay, but I'll be very short because I didn't add anything to this. Norm brings up a very important point here, but we need to recognize that one of the problems with the Democratic Party right now is that it has bought into the paradigm presented by the Republican Party. A real Democratic Party would not be a party that supports a military empire. A real Democratic Party would not be arguing over the suitability of the Republicans' health care plan, which is what Obamacare actually is. They would have fought for universal single payer even if we might have lost. A real Democratic Party would not buy the too big to fail paradigm and desist from putting people in prison who do these things, because fines are not going to stop it. Jail time will. So there are a lot of these things that a real Democratic Party would not buy into, and yet they do. They accept the paradigm and they start operating from that paradigm instead of saying, no, the whole picture's wrong. We've got to leave the frame altogether.
We will start part 2 talking about the real Democratic Party, but we're going to make that intermission. I want to let you know there are outside there's tables set up by sponsors. Make sure to stop by the Don Willis Furniture Table. There's a really cool chair that all these guys have autographed, and that's going to there's going to be a drawing right at the end of the evening, and someone gets a chance to win that. And also there's a drawing at the Burium Toyota and Chevrolet table for tickets to a show with Jazz Owls. So go out there and drop your name in there, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes.